Guys, welcome back to the Glenn Mackintosh Show. And today we have the one and only Dr. Gina Cleo, who is back. She is the first ever repeat guest on the show. And look, many of you probably know who she is, but if you don't, let me introduce her. Dr. Gina Cleo is one of the world's leading experts in habits, and she's passionate about translating scientific evidence into simple, actionable steps that can help you improve your health, wellness, mindset, and lifestyle-related habits long term. Gina has a PhD in habit change, is an assistant professor at Bond University, and is also an accredited practicing dietitian. She's a smart cookie. Gina's habit change research has been published in medical journals globally, and she has appeared for over 200 news outlets, including many of Australia's major TV networks. We seem to see you all the time, Dr. Cleo. She's also a regular keynote speaker and expert panelist at national and international conferences. When she's not geeking out on new habits research, some of which we're going to talk about today, Gina is running courses through her Habit Change Institute and obsessing over chai lattes. She has also recently finished a book on habits, which will come out in January 2024. So, welcome back, Gina.
It's so good to be here and chatting with you.
Yeah, it's really cool. Look, one of the purposes of the Glenn Mackintosh Show is that I feel so fortunate to be having such great conversations with health professionals, and I just get so excited about them. I learn a lot from all of these wonderful people that I get to interact with, and I just want to bring those conversations to the public.
Yeah, amazing. And I know that we've been having more and more conversations since our last podcast together.
Yes.
And working together, which has been really fun.
Yeah, since our last podcast, we've gone on quite a journey, because I remember, I think in that podcast, telling people about when I first met you at the Eating Disorders and Obesity conference. And then since then, we did the podcast. And then we've been working together. So guys, if you don't know, Gina has hosted a 12-week habit series for our Transformation Support Community online program members. And it was just so cool. It was actually so cool that they wanted more.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're creating a second series. And through the process of this, we're just having such good conversations. And I said, Gina, we got to share some of this with the public.
Yeah,
so
I agree. And it's been really good as well for me to see the habit content like translated into everyday language for people to really be able to apply it to their life. It's just so rewarding to be able to get out of the lab and really like provide all the information so people can transform their lives through it.
It's been really, really cool to see that in real people. And we have a little excerpt from one of our members that we're going to share with you. So it's been really, really special. And we just feel so fortunate to be working together.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
So you've heard Gina's bio. She is, I know that in Australia you are the habits guru. Tell us, let's start from the start. For someone who has never really heard of habit change, habit research, why are habits so important? Like, why do we even need to be focusing on this stuff?
It's such a good question. Like, why should we care about our habits? Well, when we think of our habits, up to 70% of everything we do is completely automatic and habitual. And our habits really dictate so much of our life. The way we eat, the way we sleep, the way we speak to our loved ones, the way we spend our money, the way we do business is predominantly habitual. There's a really great quote that, summarizes this, and it says, most of the time what we do is what we do most of the time, and only sometimes do we do something different. And it's true, we're very comfortable in our routines and our habits, and we don't tend to vary away from it. So in order to, look at our goals and look at achieving our goals, we have to address our habits because we know the research shows that changing our habits is the only proven method to achieve results long term.
It's interesting when you think about, like, as you're talking about those various areas of life that habits relate to, I'm sort of ticking it off in my head and going, yeah, it is all habits, even down to when you say business. I'm like, the way that I operate in my business, with my team, with my clients, there is so much of it that is habitual. And, as a psychologist, whenever we're working with somebody, there is a goal. And it's interesting to hear you say that because kind of what you're saying is whenever there is a goal, it's important to focus on habits.
Absolutely. Because our habits are our behaviors, but they're also our belief systems. They are our thoughts. So in order to change any part of our life, we have to address our habits.
Can we share, because we have a really good little soundbite from one of our she's one of my clients. I'm not sharing anything outside confidentiality because she says it, I think, in the little excerpt. And she was also one of the members in your Habit Change series in the TSC. So I thought we might just hear from Kate, because I think she is a wonderful example of the power of habit change in real life.
Yeah, sounds great. All right, let me play this audio. It's beautiful.
Hi, I'm Kate. I've battled with food and emotional eating, obesity, yo-yo dieting for 61 and a half of my 62 years of life. I've tried every diet known to woman, and I have at times lost weight, often large amounts of it, but always put it back on with interest. About 3 years ago, I started working with Glenn Mackintosh and the weight management psychology team, and it has transformed my life. So many times I wanted to give up because I wasn't losing weight, but one of the things that really helped me keep going was Dr. Gina Cleo's work on habits. Gina taught me that big changes can be made in little steps. For example, I was a huge sugar addict, and I was in the habit of buying lollies every time I went to the shop, especially if I went in the afternoon. I didn't go from the 3 or 4 bags of lollies a day to none in one giant step. I broke the habit of going to the shop every afternoon. Once I had done that, I learnt that I could go to the shop and not buy lollies. I could literally talk for hours about how my life has been transformed and the freedom of being able to go to the shop without a constant battle inside my head. I am now eating well and losing weight, and I am so grateful to Gina for teaching me that habits make it all possible.
Oh my goodness. I get goosebumps hearing that.
It's beautiful, isn't it? It almost sounds, Kate is obviously, she's so lovely and she's a big advocate of us. I'm like, sounds a bit testimonially, but she's, I think, a big advocate of our work. And it's a beautiful example of a really ingrained habit. Changing
totally. And I think it's also a testament that you can break your habits at any age and at any phase of your life. Kate talks about the 62 years that she's been battling with the same battle, and only recently, since doing the series, like 6 months ago, she's been able to change those really ingrained behaviors. And I think that is so empowering for anybody.
That's a really important message, isn't it? That I think sometimes people can think, like, if I've been doing this, like that, can't teach an old dog new tricks type sort of way of thinking, but it's just not true, does it?
No, not at all. Our brains are constantly rewiring. And they slow down when we get older, but that doesn't mean that we can't reshape and retransform our lives. We absolutely can.
And one of the coolest things I think about the habits work is that, as a psychologist, we will see certain therapies that might be really good for, say, trauma, or really, really good for depression and anxiety. But one of the cool things I think about the habits work is, Kate is a beautiful example of changing eating behavior, eating habits. But literally this underpins any sort of habits that you want to change. So it's really pervasive.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of learning the theory of habit change, is you can apply it to any area of your life, whether that's your health or well-being, whether it's your relationships, your finance, the way you structure your day. It's completely unlimited with what you can do with the knowledge of how to change your habits.
And look, I think that's why our first podcast was so popular. We kind of went really deep into the theory as well as some of the research of habits. And we might actually link our listeners, viewers, to that podcast because it was fantastic. It was a really, really good podcast. But I'm thinking for our new listeners, maybe we could go over a bit of a recap of some of the basic theory of habit, because I think that as a health professional, and I know actually a lot of other health professionals are in this boat, is that we sort of think of habits and behaviors, and we use the word habits and the word behaviors interchangeably. But I remember it was when I first heard you present thinking, wow, habits and behaviors are actually pretty different. And I should know this. And I think a lot of health professionals, we do actually have a bit of like professional embarrassment but we can overcome that. That's a growing pain for us. So could we maybe just spend a bit of time just, going through some of those habits basics, and maybe even start off with that question, what is the difference between habits and behaviors?
Yeah, of course. It's interesting because they actually operate in completely different parts of our brain, so they definitely are not the same. So our behaviors are intentional, deliberate actions or thoughts. So it might be, what's the best way to get from A to B? What am I going to wear today? What should I have for dinner? They're your decisions and thoughts that are intentional, things that you've deliberated over.
A lot of brain power.
Brain power, exactly.
Yep.
It could be something that you've planned ahead, or it could be something you decide in the moment, but it's a choice. Our habits, on the other hand, are automatic, subconscious, mostly reflexive. And our habits are essentially behaviors that we've repeated so often in the same context that our brain goes, okay, I recognize that I do this every time I come across this context. And that could be, the context could be the time of day, the place that you're in. And it creates these associations, and it becomes automatic in our brain. So our habits they don't take any energy. They're fairly efficient. And it's something we do automatically. Like, for example, when you sit in the car, the first thing you do is put on your seatbelt. Sitting in the car is the context, and the seatbelt is the habit that you do when you sit in the car. You're sitting down right now. I didn't see you reach over for a seatbelt, even though you're sitting, because the context is the car. So our habits are automatic. We don't, they just happen. And most of the time, we're halfway through the habit before even realizing we're doing it.
And so that's how our habits form, by repeating that same behavior so often in that specific context.
Exactly.
Yep. And tell us, Gina, how common are habits in our lives? Because I remember previously you've quoted that there might be, an average of maybe 40 to 50%, so up to kind of half of our regular behavior is habitual. So sort of happening, like you say, automatically, unconsciously, very little thought, very little willpower at all, just kind of on autopilot.
Yeah, we are operating out of autopilot most of the time. So we used to think it was about 40 to 50%, but now we're seeing it's actually up to 70% of everything we do every day is habitual. And so that's why it's so important to address our habits, because essentially what we're repeating every day becomes our life. It becomes our identity. It becomes part of who we are.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it? And I remember you have given an example before about, which really highlighted the power of habits to me, was about if you think about the way that you say shower, or the way that you dry yourself when you get out of the shower, and you think, I'm just doing my thing. But you look at, and I have noticed this, probably sharing way too much information with all our podcast listeners, but like the arm that I dry first, and then where the towel goes, it's like, it's just on autopilot.
It is. And some of the habits we have are good, and we like to have them, like making sure there's veggies on our plate, or exercising, or going to bed on time. Some of our habits aren't so good for us. Things like non-hungry snacking or doom scrolling. And then some of our habits are neutral. Things like the way we dry ourselves, the fact that, I'll always open my car door with my right hand. I think if I did it with my left hand, I'd be like, oh, how do I sit in this thing? It's if I did it with another hand, it wouldn't benefit my life in any way. But the point there is, so much of what we do is habitual. Even how much food is on our plate is habitual, because we're just used to a certain amount. It's not necessarily representative of our hunger levels.
And it's interesting, Gina, that you should talk about so many of our habits are positive. That's great. It's an interesting thought to think that so many of our habits are just kind of neutral. Because I think I would have probably thought of habits in terms of good habits and bad habits, but some of our habits are just kind of what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, of course, we have these unwanted habits. And so this is something that you and I have been focusing on a lot, because when we did our habit series with our transformation support community members, one of the cool things is that we co-create the whole series with the group. So we did that, and then afterwards we kind of did some questionnaires. We're like, what did you guys think? And the people just loved it. And they're like, we want a second one. It was pretty funny. They were like, yes. And we were like, normally when we start a new series, it's a big deal, we got to try and see what everyone wants and who wants it, who doesn't want it. And everyone was just like, yes, please give us more of Gina. But we've been creating this second series and looking at, well, what else do people want? What is new? What more do we want to sort of cover in more detail? And one of the things we've learned, of course, is that people want to pay more attention to, they love creating the new habits, but in breaking the old habits. So I know that you've been doing some really interesting research around unwanted habits and taking some data on what are the most common kind of unwanted habits people have. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this has been fascinating. So I've been collecting data on, I've been literally asking people, what are your most unwanted habits? What is it that you're doing that you just can't seem to kick and it's really bothering you? And I have over 400 pieces of data that basically show that the most common unwanted habits in today's society, and this is with Australian male, female adults, is doom scrolling on our phone.
Massive.
Massive.
As soon as you say it, it's like, yep.
Yeah, literally everyone has ticked that box.
Doom scrolling.
Non-hungry snacking, especially on sugary foods. Staying up too late and snoozing the alarm in the morning. They are the most common unwanted habits.
I hear this all the time from our guys. These are like, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because when I look at all those things, I can completely appreciate why. Scrolling, it's really easy to do, gives us this big hit of dopamine, which we'll talk more about, I'm sure. And it's a really easy time filler, and it's something that makes us feel good in the moment. So does non-hungry snacking, staying up too late. Every habit we have gives us a reward. So it's all happening like that.
And so this is a really interesting question, Gina, because, as a psychologist, we obviously support a lot of people in the online community, but I still see people one-on-one. I supervise our team of psychologists, and this would be one of, if not the most common question that we would get from our clients is, why do I keep doing this thing? Like this thing that I consciously, rationally know that I don't want to do. I know that I'd be better off if I stopped or, greatly cut down. Why do I keep doing this thing? And of course, for a lot of people, I think that comes with a sense of shame or a sense of there's something that's wrong with me or defective.
Yeah.
Whereas I suppose that, now I'm really interested to hear your answer, but I suppose that the fact that, those big things that people are struggling with are just so common, at least that very fact tells us that that's actually pretty normal.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And no matter at what level, totally. And whether, I've done the survey with top level CEOs, I've done it with middle management, I've done it with new grads, and we all seem to be saying the same things.
Same things.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me about collecting this data in one of your exercises in real time.
Yes.
And doing it. Can you tell us about that? That was really cool.
Oh, it was so awesome. So I was speaking at a conference just last week, actually, and basically they scanned a QR code, and there was hundreds of people in this conference hall, and the question popped up on their phone, like, what is your most unwanted habit? And they would punch it into their phone, and it would come up onto the big screens, like these little word bubbles, so everyone could read each other's, what everybody else has said, anonymously, of course.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal because I had the screen turned off for the first sort of 10 seconds, and then I turned it on and people looked up, and it was like this wow moment of, we all share a human experience.
Yep.
that we are all struggling with really similar things. And we're in this room of these big high achievers, probably thinking that we're the underdog, when really we're all the same. We're all having the same struggles in life. We all want to snooze our alarms in the morning. We're all on TikTok way too long. So yeah, it was a really powerful exercise.
And I think that has made me think, Gina, about you and I. I think that, like a lot of our clients will think that Glenn's perfect at X, Y, and Z. And I know in the online program where you shared a few of the habits that you had changed and a few of the things that you worked on, there was this kind of like light bulb with some of our members like, oh, Gina's not perfect. And it's a really kind of refreshing message.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so human. I always say I was the worst dietitian because I like eat chocolate every day. And, I'm a huge foodie, and I definitely non-hungry snack. I have just as many unwanted habits as other people. I think the difference with me is I'm very aware of them.
You are.
And I can break them really easily because of that awareness.
Yeah. So now tell me, let's go a step back and tell us, can you give us any insights into why this is so normal and why we keep doing these behaviors and we're really talking about every man, woman, and child, right?
Yeah, and it's such a common question, and it's actually the question I asked myself, and that's what started me on this whole journey of habit change. I was like, why can't we change things long term? Why do we keep doing the things that we keep saying we're not going to do anymore? I was really frustrated with it. There's like 100 answers to this, but one of the most common, or I guess the most accurate, is that every habit we have gives us a reward. So in the habit loop, which are the ingredients required for a habit, it starts off with a trigger, then the habit, and then a reward. The trigger is the time or place most of the time. So like sitting in the car, putting on your seatbelt. But every habit you do, even the ones you don't want, give you a reward.
So that's, I think, really important, right? Is that these habits will start or continue for a reason. There is a reward associated with them.
Always.
Yes.
So for example, let's take a common unwanted habit. Let's say you eating dessert every night.
Right.
And that's, that might not help your health goals, but it does satisfy your sweet tooth, and that could be the reward you're seeking. Or say you're binge watching Netflix and it's impacting your sleep. Terrible for your sleep, but it also means that you get to catch up on all your favorite episodes. So every habit you have gives you something back, and remembering that all habits were once upon a time intentional behaviors. You chose to do it, and your brain goes, well, I had a really nice reward from that, so I'm going to prompt you to do it again and again and again. And after all, we are creatures of habit. Our brain doesn't like change. Change disrupts the comfort of the rhythms that we've created in our life. And so it's easy to just keep doing what we've always done.
And so this is interesting because I can see that there would be a lot of people, myself included, that would want to do less doom scrolling or go to bed earlier, or a lot of our people would want to do less non-hungry eating. But what you're saying is there is a reward associated with those behaviors. We need to acknowledge that. And I think that a question that I have, that a lot of my clients would have, is like, okay, then if you stop doing that behavior, then what happens to the reward? It's like, where's my reward? What happens there? So how do you kind of help people to kind of navigate that?
Oh, it's such a good question. I actually wrote a chapter on this in my book, and I've prepared a little paragraph that I'm going to read to you. It comes from my book that answers this question. Ooh, are you ready?
Sneak preview, guys.
All right. It says, one of the key things to make a habit stick is the reward that you get from doing that habit. You keep acting out your unwanted habits because they give you a reward. Eating in response to feeling anxious makes you feel a little better. Your brain learns that, and it prompts you to eat every time you feel anxious. But to break that cycle and override the reward response, you need to bring awareness in. When you bring awareness into the rewards that you get from your unwanted habits, you learn that most of the time they're not actually serving you. Take emotional eating, for example. Say you eat when you're feeling anxious. The act of chewing, and there are certain compounds in food that do make you feel slightly better in the moment. But it doesn't take long for that anxiety to return, And if you're really looking and noticing the flow-on effect, you'll find that you most likely feel even more anxious than before. And that may even be compounded with feelings of guilt, shame, and mental fatigue. We've been so distracted by willpower as the dominant paradigm, but all we need to do is bring curiosity and awareness into reshaping our brain through this reward mechanism, which we all have. Once we learn that something is not rewarding, we become disenchanted with it, and we can change that behavior without trying to force ourselves or applying much willpower. There's a really great study that I quote in the book as well. It was the study was done in people who tend to overeat, and the researchers found that it took about 10 to 15 times of being curious and paying attention for the reward, that reward value to drop below zero, which means overeating was no longer rewarding for this cohort of people, which teaches us that it actually doesn't take a long time. It takes like 10 to 15 repetitions to change that reward system in our brains, because our brains are very adaptable and they're constantly learning and unlearning through this reward system. And all we need to do is pay attention and stay curious.
Wow. I think we just need to sit with that for a second. Because thank you so much for sharing that little sneak peek of your book.
Pleasure.
I'm sure that we'll all be very keen to read the rest of it. And we will, when it comes out, we'll link it in our show notes.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
I'm having one of those moments.
Aww.
Because what I'm thinking of is so many of my clients would go 10 to 15 times of being aware and being curious to reduce that sense, that perceived reward that this behavior that I don't want to do is giving me. They would take that. Like, that's not a lot.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
not a lot at all.
We've done the same study in smokers. We got smokers to chain smoke one after, and then tell us what it tastes like. And
the awareness.
The awareness. And they were like, oh, this actually tastes like ash. It tastes like, one person said, I feel like this tastes like the tarmac of an airplane, like the runway of an airplane. And the outcomes were phenomenal. I think it was something like 93% had quit smoking after that exercise.
Just with the awareness and the mindfulness.
Yeah.
And not necessarily saying, okay, we're going to do a schedule here to reduce how much you smoke, or these guys to reduce their emotional eating, or...
It's just being aware of the reward you're getting from that.
That makes sense. I'm thinking of myself, and I'll often say that, because intuitive drinking is all about awareness and mindfulness and curiosity of how food and drink affects you. And I'll say that intuitive eating has killed my ability to have a couple of drinks at night.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, just through awareness, I'm like, people will be like, oh, do you want to have a drink before it's particularly like a work day? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
There's no desire there, because I've just had that curiosity and that awareness. I've learned how it affects my body. It's an easy no.
That's amazing. I love that. I've actually had the same thing with dark chocolate, because I'm really sensitive to caffeine. So if I have too much dark chocolate, which contains caffeine, it impacts my sleep.
Yeah.
And so although I would have considered myself a chocoholic not that long ago, now I'm just not interested in having much of it at all.
So this is a huge key take home for our guys, is that if you want to get started on this journey, and it was so funny, Gina, as you were reading the words curiosity and awareness, I was writing the words curiosity and awareness down. It's literally just by becoming curious about these habits, about the rewards that they give us and how we experience them, then also the aftermath, just by being mindful and reflective of that, these habits will potentially start to change.
Absolutely, they will, because your brain starts to stop. Your brain stops being in that autopilot of, this is what I do and this is the reward I get, because your brain is expecting a reward. But once you bring awareness in, you start to reframe that reward and you realize, actually, this isn't serving me. And then your brain no longer prompts you to do the behavior over and over again. Because remember, every habit has a reward. So if you're changing the reward, you're breaking away the habit.
This is fantastic. And I think that, there are a couple of strategies I know that you have specifically for breaking old habits. And maybe we could just talk through them really, really quickly. But I will also preface this to say that we talk about this in the first podcast. And I think one of the things is we don't want to overwhelm our listeners with information. So I would almost, if everyone's giving themselves homework, consider these like second level homework on top of just getting curious and just being mindful. But maybe let's talk about them really quickly because I think it is useful.
Yeah, cool. So there are 2 proven methods to break unwanted habits, and I call them restructuring and reprogramming. So restructuring is all about changing up our environment, restructuring the environment so that we're no longer triggered. Because remember, habits are always triggered by something in the environment. So for example, if say you come home and the first thing you do is grab a cookie, well, restructuring the environment would be to place a cookie somewhere really inconvenient, like the top shelf in your garage where you've got to get a step ladder to get up there. And just by creating those barriers and not having the cookies right in front of you, it's going to make it way easier to break that habit. So that's restructuring. Reprogramming is all about reprogramming a new habit in place of the old one that you want to get rid of. So again, let's say you get home and eat cookies and you don't want to eat cookies, but you are genuinely hungry. So you might put a bowl of fruit or something else in place of those cookies, and you come home and when you crave the cookie, you grab a piece of fruit or whatever it is you replace it with. I spoke to someone recently who quit smoking by having a mint every time he craved a cigarette. So every time he had the craving, he's like, that's a mint. And then eventually his brain just associated cigarette craving with mint, and then he quit smoking. So that is structuring and reprogramming. I do talk about, and I hope you don't take any offense to this, Cleo, I talk about your work in the most loving terms. I talk about it as being so beautifully simple. Oh, yeah.
It is. I think that at the end of the day, and that's, I think that one of the things that people really appreciate about it is that we can sort of almost demystify some of what's going on and then really end up with some quite simple, quite actionable solutions.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan. All my clients hear of restructuring and
so
reprogramming. And I'm just thinking of me. We've had conversations about this. The habits work has really helped my life. Let me think of some restructuring that I did was around, I used to have a completely unnecessary like sweet protein bar every night. And through the process of just removing the queue, buying one a week versus buying one a day. So it's just not there. Means I really don't think about them.
So good.
I enjoy them on that one day when I have them.
But it's out of sight, out of mind when they're not there.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that I remember you talking about some research about not actually times of being curious, but actually a time that in which your brain tends to forget about these things.
Yeah, so the research shows that if you're feeling almost somewhat addicted to something, like it's really got a hold on you.
Which that was in the case. 100%.
Yeah, with the protein bars.
Big time.
Yeah, so the research shows to abstain from it for about 30 days.
Yep.
And I'm not a big fan of abstinence because I don't want people to go home and fear having Tim Tams at home. You never want that association of I'm going to be out of control with something. But what happens when you abstain for something for 30 days is your brain the reward system for that thing actually just gets duller and duller.
Right.
And then you find rewards in other things. So there is actually a real power in abstinence.
Yes.
But the idea is not to do it completely.
And that's something that we've had a real fun challenge with, right, in our programs, because we follow a sort of a non-diet intuitive eating approach. Is that how do we apply these habits principles in a way that honors our non-diet approach and in a way that helps people improve their eating habits, which is something that they want to do as well, which has been a really fascinating journey.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I did the 30 days with chai lattes because, I love chai lattes.
Yes.
And it's not that I felt addicted to it. I just thought, this is something I do every day and I don't want to feel like I have to do something every day because, I'm always trying to break like all my associations with things.
That's so interesting because as I was reading your little bio, I thought, Gina is less obsessed over chai lattes. I haven't heard you talk about
I haven't had one today.
Yeah. And then for me, you've really helped me with a lot of things, Gina. But one of the areas where I've done some reprogramming is actually, we're here in my office. We've got all like the lights in the background for our YouTube friends. But after every session of the TSC, I used to, you're quite elevated after because we do a weekly webinar with our people, and I would find it quite challenging to pack up all the lights. I'd get a little bit like anxious and a bit OCD, I'm like having to do things a few times, and it would take me about probably half an hour or so to clean up the office, whereas it probably should take me maybe 10, 15 minutes. And the reprogramming I chose to do was almost, because I've got to do the same thing, but do it like a little dance. Ooh. Not physically dancing, but just like, swan around in this relaxed manner and, put the notes away and pack up the lights. And because I realized that the reward for me of doing everything in that very obsessive compulsive, very rigid way was finishing the end of the day feeling like everything had been done and everything was wrapped up and I could be calm.
Yeah.
But what I realized through curiosity and awareness and reprogramming was that I actually can get that same feeling during the process of kind of packing up.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it's nice. You saved me probably an hour's sleep.
So good. The best gift I could give you is sleep, so you're welcome.
Yeah. And so, Gina, one thing, look, let's go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, cool.
Because you talk about habits and reward and dopamine, and something that I know a lot of us are really interested in is the neuroscience. So, can you tell us about what is going on in the brain, and a little bit about the neuropsychology of habits and dopamine, and something that I think is really interesting. I'm not sure I 100% get it yet, but this pleasure-pain balance that you talk about, I think that's fascinating.
Yes. Ooh, I love this topic. So let's take dopamine. Dopamine is a part of our pleasure or reward system in the brain. It helps us to feel motivated. It helps to drive us towards something. It's that thing we feel when we're anticipating something that we're really excited about. So if you tell someone, oh, we're going to go get ice cream, and they're super excited about it, that's their dopamine really going for it. The interesting thing about dopamine is if you imagine like a seesaw, and on one end is pleasure, which is dopamine, on the other end is pain. And the more dopamine you feel, so the more pleasure you feel, afterwards, the more pain you're going to feel. And that pain can come in, it's packaged in all sorts of ways. Loneliness, emptiness, the lack of satisfaction, lack of fulfillment. So the more pleasure you feel, on the other end of it is going to be the more pain you feel. So then what happens is now your pain is so low, it's actually below baseline. And so you want the next hit of something to make you feel good again. And that is part of the reason why I think technology in our phones is something we find so easily to be drawn to, because social media gives us a really big hit of dopamine. That's
interesting.
There's a lot of color, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of there's a lot of stimulus, and that just activates our brain big time. And there's nothing in nature that gives us that. So here we are, let's say we're scrolling for half an hour, we've got this big hit of dopamine. After we put that away, we're going to have this crash afterwards.
Right.
There's nothing in our environment naturally that's going to bring us back up again as much as our phone.
Nothing stacks up.
No. Unless you do cocaine, but don't do cocaine.
I was just thinking, let's not talking like some hard
drugs.
Don't
do cocaine. Please don't tweet. Oh, Gina said on the podcast to do cocaine. I did not. Do not. It's very bad for your brain. So there's really nothing in nature. That's why we go back to the thing that's going to give us the most.
Take home.
You said
take
deep.
home. No screens. No. Take home. Limit screens. Do not replace with cocaine.
Yes, tick, tick. Yep. If you take anything away from today, that would be it. So that's the pain-pleasure balance. And, the other things that give us pleasure are things like chewing, sugar, screens, but also things like feeling euphoric or feeling love. I was actually speaking to a famous comedian recently who describes himself as a serial addict. He said he was addicted to...
I think I know this comedian.
Yeah, we're doing a show together, which will be airing soon. But basically he says, originally he was addicted to marijuana, then it was alcohol, then it was smoking, then it was a few like different things, and now it's vaping and his phone. And we had a really great conversation after the show, and I said to him, do you know why you feel like you're always like chasing after something that gives you this high? He's like, no, I have no idea. I was like, describe the feeling to me when you're on stage and you're getting like this explosive laughter from the crowd. He's like, oh, it's the most euphoric feeling, like feel amazing. I was like, exactly. And then you get off stage and you're having a crash. Your dopamine is so high on stage. You come off, you have a crash, and the first thing you do is, how can I feel alive again? And you're going to go to something that gives you that dopamine, which is going to be things like alcohol, vaping, your phone, etc. So I said to him, 2 pieces of advice. You either quit your job or just start enjoying it less. It's the only way to balance things out.
Great. But I think like that, jokes aside, comedians aside, that understanding that pleasure, pain, balance, and the neuropsychology of that can be really helpful for us in our lives. Like say, for example, that comedian gets off stage, or we just finished doing something that is really enjoyable. Because of course this dopamine is a natural chemical that helps us seek out rewards and develop healthy habits. And it's just a normal chemical to understand, well, if I'm having this down, well, that might be a good time to practice some sort of impulse control or some urge surfing or some of this curiosity, and realize that it's just there's some neurochemistry, some chemical changes happening in my brain.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily need to respond to them. So just that understanding of what is going on, I think, can be really helpful for people.
Absolutely. I've definitely found that it's helped me. People go, what's your most common unwanted habit? And you're going to laugh, but it was Tetris. I play a lot of Tetris. But there's actually neuroscience research that shows Tetris is really good for your brain.
Are we justifying our addiction here?
We are, absolutely. We could do that with research. You can't deny the science.
Fantastic.
No, but what I found is some people scroll on social media. I'm not so interested in that. I'm a Tetris person. So I was doing it in every idle moment. I would be playing Tetris, and when I was writing my book, I'd be writing and then I'd be stuck on a word, and I'm like, my brain must have gone, you'll probably find it in Tetris. So I Tetris, But I realized that because gaming is also a really like dopaminergic activity. Huge, right?
Huge.
I just deleted the apps off my phone. I'm like, I just don't want to have them there.
Restructuring.
I restructured by environment.
Yeah. Super cool. And Tetris. So Gina, one of the things that I think is just super cool that we have really benefited from is the ability to, for our transformation support community members, the ability to connect with you, the ability to kick around ideas and actually apply these principles to real life stuff that goes on. Can we spend a little bit of time kicking around how we might break one of these habits? And maybe, can we do the phone?
Let's
we've
do the
been
phone.
talking about, I think that's one that is so relevant to all of us. It was the number one in your research, right?
Yeah.
So talk us through it. We are, and I think that word doom scrolling is just such a fantastic fantastic way of thinking about it. But for a lot of people, like, it could be scrolling, or it could be games, or it could be YouTube or whatever. How would you suggest people go about starting to break that unwanted habit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think let's put it contextually. Let's say phone scrolling before bed.
Perfect.
And that could be anything. It could be social media or YouTube or whatever it might be for you. Gaming, Tetris, anything. I think
Gina's the one person that still plays Tetris.
I don't play it in bed.
Have you seen that movie about Tetris?
No. Is there a movie on Tetris?
Oh, yeah. What? Emma is behind the cameras going, yes.
Really?
It's
Is
fantastic.
it good?
It's really good.
I'm 100% watching
I'm
it
going to make
later.
a note to remind you about the one, although I
Thanks
don't
for
think
that.
I'll have to remind you.
No, you won't. I'm already like downloading it in my head. Okay, back to breaking phone habit.
Yes.
I think the first thing is to be aware that nothing else is going to give you as much dopamine as your phone.
That's huge. Yep.
So I'll share a story with you about a client I worked with. I'll call her Charlie. And Charlie definitely had I would call it a phone addiction, which is before bed, and it was really impacting her sleep. Because as we know, looking at blue light impacts your melatonin production, which helps you to sleep. And phone scrolling before bed is one of the worst things you could do for
It's
your
like,
sleep.
don't do 101. It's like
100%. So bad for you.
But what's that one that so many of us do?
Yeah, we do.
Yep.
Yeah, until you've heard this podcast, which will completely transform the way that you get to bed.
And please, we said this last podcast, I remember, share your stories with us. Gina and I love emailing each other and Instagramming each
Love
other
stories.
and sharing the stories. So if you use any of this and it helps you, tag us, let us know.
Yeah, we would love to know.
Yeah.
So Charlie had her phone next to her, and she said, okay, she was going to start with just putting a time limit on her phone scrolling. So she was on Instagram, and she said, okay, I'm just going to do 15 minutes. She set a timer, and as soon as a 15-minute limit came up, she just pressed ignore and kept scrolling.
Vintage. I'm like,
Yeah, completely typical, right? It's funny because I share that in the corporate world, and everyone laughs. I'm like, you're all guilty of the same thing.
It's like that limit has no chance in hell.
Yeah, that's right. So we had a look at, okay, Charlie's trigger was getting in bed. Her habit was scrolling, and her reward, she felt, was helping her to unwind from the day.
Yep.
So we looked at other things that helped her to unwind. So it was all sorts of things she listed down: cup of tea, stretching, meditation, a warm shower, reading a book.
Yep.
She found reading a book was really like the main thing. So she had a book now next to her bed. But that book, that black and white analog book, was no challenge for
Yes.
the phone.
Yep.
Her phone actually ended up sitting on top of her book.
Isn't that a beautiful metaphor?
Yeah, it's like,
Phone trumps book.
yeah, every time. So I said, okay, let's try 30 days of abstinence, and let's take this seriously.
Yeah,
So
yeah, okay.
you need to remove the phone from your environment. So she now charges her phone in the bathroom. And so when she turns around to her bedside table and grab her phone, it's not there, but the book is there. It's funny because the first few nights she did this, she's like, I need to brush my teeth again. I would go back into the bathroom,
Yeah.
brush her teeth for the third time so she can keep scrolling.
It's
But-
amazing what your mind can do. Often we,
Yeah.
like, you know, as a psychologist, we're talking to people about their thoughts, and sometimes people will those justifications can be so believable, right?
Yeah.
But understanding, because what you're really talking about, whether you are quote unquote addicted or not, you're talking about an addiction pathway in your brain, aren't you?
Totally.
And so for us to understand that sometimes those thoughts, the answer to my next chapter is on Tetris, or I just need to go and brush my teeth again,
Yeah.
are actually, they seem logical, rational, but they're actually just your prefrontal cortex coming up with reasons, justifications, and excuses for your addictions, right?
Completely.
Yep. So you can really just hold those super duper lightly.
That's right. And I think that's why I'm like monitoring your habits is a really good idea. So habit tracking, making sure to tick off when you have or haven't done a habit, depending on what your goal is.
Yep.
But with Charlie, it was really good because I said to her, I think we need to be really sober about the idea that it's going to suck the first few days.
Yes.
That you're going to want to look at your phone.
Yep.
And that book is going to feel super lame.
Yep.
But just give it a go, because the reward that you're going to get from a good night's sleep, I believe, is going to outweigh the reward that you're getting from scrolling on your phone.
Yep.
And it only took 3 days of her doing that. And then I remember she gave me a call and she was like, oh my goodness, I'm more productive. My appetite's like balanced. And she was already feeling the benefits of a good night's sleep because she wasn't looking at her phone.
Yep.
The awesome thing is now she can have her phone next to her and she's not interested in looking at it. She will always pick up her book.
Wow. She's broken the habit.
Completely.
Wow.
Yeah. It's no longer rewarding for her to do that.
Yeah. And I think that there's something in there that you said that was really important, Cleo, is that you talked about the reality that this is hard.
Yeah.
And I think those words are really good. It's like, if you want to, we got to get serious about this.
Yeah.
And I know that is something that you've been talking about a lot, is that, yes, being curious, being aware, but talking about the courage to be curious. And I think that's a really important message for people, right? That it will be hard, but it will be worth it.
Always.
So, and I think because we have to acknowledge our experience. Like, even if we have all this beautiful knowledge, it's got some fascinating research behind it, it's so theoretically sound and applicable, it doesn't change the fact that at times there will be times where it's hard.
Yeah, and before you mention that the message is simple, it is simple. And I always say to people, the message is simple, but change is not easy. And that's the differentiation, is the steps to get there are really simple, but actually taking those steps is challenging, especially at the beginning. But it gets easier and easier, and eventually your new changes become second nature.
And I think that one thing I admire about you, Gina, is I see you doing this work on yourself all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Can you share with us about how you do it? Because I think that some people do. I know some of our members do. Some of my clients do. They think you're this superwoman, which I think in ways is true.
God.
And also you're just a normal person.
Yeah, totally.
How do you find that courage to be curious and to make room for the discomfort and to work your way through to this other side? That I think the good news is that, you know, you're talking about really like neuroplasticity in really short time frames. So it's not necessarily going to be all that long, but we can't guarantee it won't be hard. What do you say to people? Like, how do you do it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know my personal story, Glenn, which you know, I'm happy to share, but a couple of years ago, I found out that my ex-husband was cheating on me, and he was going out to brothels and like hiring prostitutes and escorts. And the moment that I discovered this, I was in the kitchen, I was doing some baking, and his computer happened to be the first piece of technology next to me. And so I opened up to look at a recipe, and I discovered much more than the recipe. There was all these text messages that were coming through live, and it was a text message exchange that he was having with a prostitute that he was just about to meet with. Now, this man I married, his nickname was the Saint, because he was just so pure and kind, and this would never ever be at all on his radar. So in that moment, and by the way, I saw hundreds others, so it wasn't just that one. And in that moment, my brain associated him, the memory of him, and any association of him with my fight, flight, or freeze response. And I would get a panic attack every time I would come anywhere near something that reminded me of him. And it was awful, but I knew that I couldn't accept that for my life, because I went from running this really successful global company to developing agoraphobia and PTSD. You know, I was scared to leave my own house. And I think what drove me was, it's not okay for me to not leave my own house. I can't accept that for myself. And I have to rewire this somehow, because I'm not okay with it. And so what I did, and you talk about courage, Lordy, this was hard. I did a lot of exposure therapy and a lot of trauma therapy. So, you know, this wasn't all just me, but I think having the understanding of the brain really helped, because I thought, okay, one of the things that would happen most of the time is I would hear his ringtone, because he had a special ringtone in my phone that no one else had. And when I would hear it, I would go into a panic attack. I'd be hyperventilating, I'm shaking, I'm sweating, and it would happen anywhere, supermarket, the bank, like I'd be anywhere. And I thought, no, I have to reframe this. So I changed everybody in my phone who I loved and trusted into that ringtone. It was my mum or my best friends, you. And when I would first hear that ringtone, I would panic. And I remember when I threw my phone onto the other side of the couch, I was like, oh my God. And I was trying to block my ears, and I was really terrified. But after some time, it became, okay, I'm safe. It's okay. I can hear this and I'm okay. And now it's, when I hear that ringtone, I'm like, oh my God, someone I really love is calling me. Someone who's really special to me is calling. And I remember thinking, if this doesn't work, I'm going to quit habits, because if I can't rewire my brain, what's the point in this? And I felt at the time I was way too far gone. Like these panic attacks I was getting were pretty full on, like completely debilitating. I had to take months off work, which is not like me. I'm normally a pretty confident person. but it worked, and it worked in the most transformative way, and which has made me so much more passionate about this habit space.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Gina.
Oh, that's okay.
And I think there is that thought, I think, and I remember when you were going through this, and I would say going through it in past tense, because I think you have gone through it.
Yeah.
And you talking to me about the phone, and there is this question, is like, is this neuroscience, is this habits work enough to get me from this real trauma response to not only having sort of, I'm just trying to use the right words, not only having it in an area of your life where it has its own rightful space and you can deal with it and you can cope with it, but beyond that, to a point where it's like that ringtone could come and you're like, hey, how are you doing? Like, you've transcended the issue
completely. And I had to do it with hundreds of habits, because you build a life with somebody. We were together for a long time, and it was everything from like black cars to chicken schnitzel to so many different things. But I knew that once I'd done it once, I could apply that same strategy to all the other things, and I did. I think, one of the things that was really hard is to driving to my office meant that I had to drive past one of the brothels that I used to go to quite frequently. And of course, the first time I had a panic attack, and it was really awful. And I remember a few friends said to me, why don't you just drive a different way to work?
Yep.
And I said, but that means I will never be able to drive that road. I want to be able to drive anywhere and not have a negative association. So I just rewired my brain for it, and now it's completely fine. I don't even notice that it's there anymore.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful case of, what you're saying is about, you haven't used anything extra beyond what you would teach in your habit change course, what you would teach to us. You have just really done it in a radical way.
That's true.
You've really applied these,
Yeah.
It's when you talk about some of these principles being simple, in psychologist language, you're talking about systematic desensitization, processing of traumatic memories. These things are relatively simple, but they're not easy.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And
it
so
took courage.
Good on you, Gina.
I think it's so worth it.
And look, now you've, moving on, great partner who I met last night. So, and so I think that, for people who are listening and wanting their own ideas on how to change, I think that, there's some real hope here in terms of, but just by being curious, by practicing that, and now having the courage to be curious, being curious, even if it's really hard to do.
Super rough.
Yep. That's part of it, can be part of it. So we need to kind of empower ourselves by making room for that.
Yeah.
But there's a real hope that the brain does change fairly quickly.
It does. And you can start today, if for example, you're noticing a pattern of emotional eating, you can just ask yourself through that curiosity, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? Who am I around? What time is it? And just be curious without judgment as to what's going on. You'll start to notice the patterns, and then you can address those things rather than trying to mask them with the emotional eating.
And it's kind of like Kate said in her example, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't do this all at one time.
Yeah.
It was this gradual, and it's this messy, imperfect process, isn't it? So
And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. So if you're doing this work and it is difficult and it is imperfect, well, you're probably just doing it right.
Exactly. I mean, changing our habits is always a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. No success story is linear. Falling down is part of the process.
Well, thank you so much for this, Gina.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
It's always fun. I've been writing some notes, as I always do. And look, I think that so much of us can learn from this habits work. I actually thought that it would be worthwhile us maybe talking about some of the stuff just before we finish up that we're doing in our new habits course in the transformation support community, which we have named, we just think, I don't know if we might be the only two people in the world who think this is funny, but we think we are so funny. So our original habits series in the transformation support community, it's available now. If you want to go check it out, you absolutely should. We go through, it's 14 sessions. We did 12 sessions and then 2 advanced sessions, some 2 bonus sessions. And it was just absolutely fantastic. And it was called Creating Healthy Habits. Then, as I said, the community wanted another program. So we're like, yes, we're doing another program. We're kicking around names. And in our wisdom, we've decided to call it. So the first one was Creating Healthy Habits. The new program is going to be called Creating Healthier Habits. So that was the option that won. We really like it. We think we're really funny.
We're such dorks.
We're probably like the only 2 people. We're laughing. Everyone
Guaranteed.
listening to this podcast is just
like,
rolling their eyes. It's like, I don't get the joke. But let's talk a little bit about what we're doing in this this brand new series, because it's something that, and look, it happened last time, when we get to co-creating it with the community members, who most of our community members want support with eating, physical activity, weight, body image concerns, mental health, and general health.
Yeah.
And we just say in the group, just killing it at life. But I always get really excited once we start to shape up the details of what we're doing together. So to let people know about this new program, which will be available September 11th, this is 2023, we are going to go through some of these basics in a bit of detail again. So, you know, people who have done the original series they'll just be able to get a recap. And then people who are brand new can just come straight into this series and they will have everything they know. So we're going to go through the habit loop and talk about ego depletion, which is a concept that our people just love. So we'll go through the basics of habits. But then we are going to get into some of these deeper topics. We're going to go really deep into the neuroscience, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're going to go deep, especially into that pain and pleasure science. So we really understand like what drives us to do the things that we do.
Yep.
Looking at how to balance our dopamine and feel naturally motivated to not do the things that, you know, we're drawn to do. With the neuroscience, we're going to go through some really cool concepts, things like mental contrasting, the reticular activation system, which I know you were like, what's that?
We're laughing because I have a 5% knowledge of the reticular activating system now, but it's a great word.
It's basically like a summary is how our brain sees what we focus on. It's the biases that we have. So it's so powerful when you understand it. And then, you know, the whole concept is how to rewire your brain so that you can effortlessly change your habits.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the neuroscience, I think, is something that I know our community members are really fascinated with. So we're really, really looking forward to that. And I think another cool thing that we're doing in this advanced series, because the original series was very much going through the theory and people could then apply it to whatever habits they wanted to make or break. But I think one of the cool things we're doing in this series is we're really zeroing in on specific habits. We're talking about how to make mindful eating the new norm, how to, we don't love the word, but we won't even use the word then. How to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah. Are you going to say sleep hygiene?
I was going to say sleep hygiene.
I hate that word.
Yeah,
You're
Gina
so
hates
right.
that word. Yeah.
It's weird. Hygiene just makes me think of brushing my teeth. Or like being hygienic.
Yeah.
No, we need a new word for it. Thank you for not using it.
Okay, you're welcome. But it's, you know, these things that our members, we know that they want to, habits they want to make or more often habits they will want to break, we think. But using this habits work to really focus on that directly. You're going to take us through your 6 key habit triggers for emotional eating. Yeah. We are going to focus on habit instigation for physical activity, which is how we initiate getting ourselves moving. And something that I think, and you just touched on this right at the start of the podcast, that I think is going to be fascinating is we've got a real focus on habits for mental health. And this understanding that our behaviors can be habits, but also our thoughts and our emotions are habits. So I think this is going to be a really fascinating thing that we're going to explore.
Yeah, I love it. And even our belief systems can be habits.
It's fascinating. This is going to be fascinating. We've really kind of broken it down into these few areas of nutrition and movement, mindset and mental wellness, and then rest and recovery. We're going to include some really cool stuff in there for something that I think a lot of our people find a struggle in general, just that ability to carve out and give themselves permission to care for themselves and rest and relax and recover and enjoy themselves in whatever way is important to them.
Absolutely.
So guys, that is going to be super duper cool. And if you want to do more of this work, we just feel so unbelievably fortunate to have Gina working with our members and, troubleshooting, talking about the theory, but then talking about how to apply it. Gina answers all of your questions. We have a supportive community in a Facebook group, and it's really cool because then we can really get into the mess of change, and Gina can support us with it. So if you want to do the original program, that is up in the community now. We'll give you the links. And like we said, the new program, Creating Healthier Habits, will be available anytime from Monday, September the 11th. Gina, I thought this was going to be a good chat, and I knew it was, and it has been a fantastic conversation. I think that we probably both were trying to keep it a little bit shorter, but that was never going to happen. It was never going to happen.
There's too much good stuff to talk about.
There's too much good stuff. So, look, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing your wisdom. I have loved since that time when I first met you and saw your research and had that, whoa, this one is on to something kind of moment.
Yeah.
Like, I've loved having you on the podcast and working with you in the community. It's just been such a joy.
Aww.
And so lovely to also get to know you more.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, GMAC.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot more to come. So thank you for coming here and sharing part of our journey with everyone. I'm sure that they have got a lot out of it, and there's a couple of really beautiful transformational take-homes.
Yeah, and it is such an honor to work with you and the team. So thanks for having me. Let's fist pump to that.